Hey, welcome everyone to the 12th annual Film Fest Petaluma. I'm Mike Traina, the festival director, and this is the third of our 2021 short film panels entitled Close Encounters. You probably noticed that we're not at the Mystic Theater this year, but we hope to return there next year. And in the meantime, we're so grateful to the amazing Alexander Valley Film Society for being such great hosts and collaborators making this year's virtual event possible. I also want to give a huge shout out to my incredible programming team who have collectively viewed over 1,000 short films to create this year's lineup. I also want to acknowledge our primary sponsor, Santa Rosa Junior College, particularly the Petaluma campus, which is the home of the Petaluma Film Alliance, and our extraordinary theater, the Carol L. Ellis Auditorium, which we can't wait to reopen for film screenings. I know we have some JC students watching today, which we hope will get some questions in during the second half of our panel. The college offers a great mix of film studies and film production classes. So if you want to learn more about the craft of filmmaking, check us out. Although we're in cyberspace today, I want to say that we'd normally be gathering on the traditional land of the Coast Miwok people, past and present, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through the generations. If you need tech assistance during the festival, check out the FAQ at avfilmsociety.org for live chat assistance. We're providing live audio captioning through Zoom. Just click the CC at the bottom of your screen. You can post your questions in the chat. We'll try to cover as many as possible and be on your best behavior. This is a safe space for everyone to celebrate film and filmmakers and the stories they tell, but we love to hear from you. So please, we welcome the feedback. And finally, don't forget to vote for your favorite shorts on the page where you stream them. The audience favorite will receive a $1,000 cash prize courtesy of our friends at the Alexander Valley Film Society. With that, I guess I'm going to introduce the panel. I'm going to ask my tech team to confirm that we are live because my monitor is not showing that yet. But I'm going to begin the introductions and keep my fingers crossed. So from Sonoma County, an SRJC alum and a Film Fest Petaluma alum, writer, director of Under the Lights, Miles Levin. From Adelaide, Australia, animator and Film Fest Petaluma alum, the writer, director of Meanwhile at the Abandoned Factory, Michael Cusack. Joining us from Sacramento, the writer, director of AIDA, Christopher Graham. Joining us from Japan, the star of AIDA, actress Kiko Wilson. From Arkansas, the writer, director, and editor of Animal, Russell Sharman. And from Sacramento, artist, filmmaker, animator, musician, director of FLORA, my dear, Dan Janos. So welcome everybody. I still am a little nervous about the broadcast, but oh, I guess it's looking good. Okay, something's wrong with my confidence monitor, shaking my confidence. What we're going to do is we're going to begin working through the films, and we're going to take them in the order that they were screened in. So Miles, we are going to begin with you today. This is your fourth film with the film festival, is that correct? Fifth film with the film festival, so we're so happy to have you back. I know that the subject of this film is a really important one to you, and I wonder if you could begin by just telling us a little bit about what inspired you to tell this story.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This is far and beyond my favorite film festival, and the films had some cool opportunities, but this has been the goal, absolutely, to bring it home. So so I have epilepsy, and I've had it my whole life. And so this film came from an observation I had that I had never seen a character on screen that reflected my experience. And that realization came to me through other people. I didn't notice it on my own. I had worked as a camp counselor for a long time, like 7 years, for the Epilepsy Foundation. And every year I would go and I would have kids 14, 15 years old say, I've never made a friend before, which just rattled me. Like I could not put my head around that. And what I started to learn was that my life experience was unusual insofar as that the amount of times I'd been truly ostracized for being this way were pretty minimal. In school, I got ostracized for other stuff. But this was not one of them. And that the common experience was that people do get ostracized from their families, their friend groups, their schools. And the closer I became to this community, the more I realized that the stigma is worse than the condition for most people. And it's no coincidence that the stigma really hasn't evolved and that there's hardly any representation in cinema. That if you look at other groups like the LGBT community and stuff and the progress they've made, that's something I want to be a part of. And that's really a story behind the film.
Can you talk a little bit about the production process for your film? I know that the Epilepsy Foundation of Northern California has been involved with you and the production. So both maybe from a financing point of view as a former student filmmaker, I think that's super interesting, as well as the scale of your production and how you put it together. And Peter, welcome. Thank you. Happy to have you here. Peter Anthony from Boston has just joined us, the director of Night and Day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Miles, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. So I was really stunned at the amount of support that came out of the pitch that I just gave you, which was I wanted to tell a story. I haven't seen this before. I've seen people have seizures in horror movies, and that's kind of where it stops. And I put it out there, and I was stunned. To this day, I'm not kidding you, like the film is done, unreleased, but done. And I get messages every day or almost every day from someone who says, how can I support this? It blew my mind. So we had the Epilepsy Foundation of Northern California, different epilepsy organizations and support groups. There was one called Eric's Corner in Pleasanton that just sort of came out of nowhere and said, we want to make this happen. And the production was great. I had never been in a position where I could do anything I wanted. And so we built the sets. The bathroom is entirely artificial. The VFX in this movie are extensive because my cinematographer, that's what he does for a living. And we had the opportunity to take 2 months with it. We could have made the movie over like 3 months. And instead we said, let's take a year and let's just do whatever we want to it. And it was an extremely pleasant experience. It's largely made by people who are in Sonoma County, largely former JC students. And it was just a very pleasant experience. And now we're going to do the feature.
Do you want to talk something about the feature? I don't know how much at liberty you are to say. I know that you had an opportunity to work with Jim Cummings, who's a well-known short and feature film director, and his production company, but
Sure. Yeah. So I recently interned for Vanishing Angle, which for people who are interested in Jim Cummings, that's the company that he works with. And they're wonderful people. But yeah, so we had some very cool collaborations on this. Like we found out that Steve Chen, the co-founder of YouTube, has epilepsy. And so we got in touch with him, and he put his name on it, and he helped us make the film possible. And Greg Grunberg, who's in Star Wars, his kid has my same condition, so he was a part of the film, and his voice is in the film. So it was really cool, and I just want more of that. There's so much potential for awareness by saying, well, let's do it better and bigger. So I've written the first iterations of the feature, and I'm hoping to get going producing that. So hopefully if people love the short and they you know, and they want to see a feature, I'd like to talk about it. Reach out, tell me what you liked about it, and you know, what you'd hope to see in a feature. And the coolest thing about this virtual system has been actually finding collaborators along the way. It's been wonderful. So I have a website, and it's underthelightsfilm.com, and that's a good way to reach me if anyone's interested in that.
Speaking of collaborators and film festival, that's probably a perfect segue to shift a little bit into our second panelist, joining us from Australia, Michael, who created Meanwhile at the Abandoned Factory. Of course, I know this story, but without being cliche and asking the same question, I guess I'm gonna go ahead and do it anyway. Do you want to tell a little bit about the origin story of this, or the inspiration for this project?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it was the Petaluma Film Festival that caused this film to happen in the first place. I went over to California from Adelaide in South Australia to the film festival. I think he was saying 2014, but maybe 2015. I'm not sure which. And I was there with my short film Sleight of Hand. And while I was there, I met Miles, and we seemed to get on pretty well. And we were talking one day, as I remember it, over a lunch that you had provided for us. And Miles was telling me about a story that he wanted to make called The Superhero Hotline. And he explained the storyline to me. And as he was telling it to me, I was just kicking myself because I'm thinking, this would make a great stop motion film. This really would. But Miles obviously come up with the idea, and he was going to make it as a live action. So he did very successfully. But I still couldn't shake this idea that it would make a good stop motion film. And so I ended up being very cheeky and contacting Miles and asking him if I could have a stab at it. And he very graciously said yes. And so as a direct result of our meeting there, I got to make Meanwhile at the Abandoned Factory. And part of the reason why I liked the idea of it so much was because I'd just come off making my short film After All, which is a film about the death of my mother in stop motion animation. It's not as dire and horrible and dark as it sounds. It's actually quite funny in places. But I really felt that I needed something a little less heavy to get over that. And then I said to Miles, can I have a crack at Superhero Hotline? And he said, yep, go for it. And thank you very much, Miles. And yeah, the rest, as they say, is history.
Could you talk a little bit about the 2D and 3D process that we see in the film? Because you have mixed animation techniques within the work, and there's so much clever technique. I love the mouse point of view shot in one of the opening sequences. Could you just tell us a little bit about your animation process, maybe the scale of the actual set construction that you did, and the kind of software that you use to render the project?
Okay, so it has a couple of different styles in it. Because it's largely a comic book idea, it starts with comic book frames, which have limited After Effects animation in them. And then I use a lightning clap, a clap of thunder and a lightning flash to actually get us into the stop motion proper. And that starts off with a point of view of a rat running along the floor of the set. Now, the set is 1/6 scale, so it's quite small. And so I ended up using a GoPro camera and pushing that a frame at a time through the set. And I had various obstacles in the way that the camera had to get through and around and so on. And that was quite tough because I actually didn't have any feedback on that to a monitor where I could actually see what I was doing. And so I ended up doing that pretty well blind, and using techniques that we used to use before we had video playback. So I was using things like surface gauges, which are a pole with a piece of wire on it, and you point it at some point on the thing you're moving, and then you move it and you can see where you've moved it and how far you've moved it in relationship to the end of that pointer. And you take the pointer off, you take a frame, and then you set it back up again and you move it. So it took a long time to get that shot because I wanted it to be a long shot. And with regards to the set build, I built the whole thing on my own. So that took me probably 3 months to make that set because it is quite complicated. There's a lot of detail in it. And just generally when I'm animating, I use Dragon Frame software, which allows us to have great playback on set and also see what we're doing.
How long would you say, this is always, I think, a really instructive question for students listening to animators speak about their work, from the beginning of pre-production to completion, what was the length of the process, the filmmaking process?
It was probably about 9 months, but it's a little bit misleading because I also make TV commercials, and sometimes we'd have to stop the production of the film itself so that we could do TV commercials. And we just recently done a documentary on the Flinders Ranges, which is in north of South Australia, and we did some animated sequences for that. And so that sort of got in the way a little bit. So it probably ended up being more like 14 months, but I think we actually worked on it for about 9. It's a very small crew with animation, as Dan probably can verify. You tend to be on your own in the dark when you're doing stop motion. And so with the exception of the puppets, which were made by a guy who works for us, all the set build and everything like that was one person. So inevitably that just took some time.
And is there public funding at all involved in this, in terms of, I know it's always surprising to American filmmakers or American film students that Europeans and Australians and many people around the world have access to state-funded artistic projects and things. I'm curious if that applies in this case.
Yeah, I mean, we do. We have some very good programs here that the state government runs and also the federal government runs to give us money. We've never accessed that. We did it for our very first film back in 1999. I've been animating now for 45 years. But the very first film, or second film actually, that we made that was of a professional standard, we applied for money from the federal and state governments. And they gave it to us. But one of the things that we discovered was that they've changed, but at that time, they tended to want to interfere with the process a bit too much. And so they would give you the money, but then you'd spend half of it on all the bookkeeping that they required to let you know that the money was being spent properly. And so automatically it just reduced the budget, and then all the time that you spent going through that process. And in the end, my business partner, Richard, and I were in a very fortunate position of the fact that our TV commercial side of the business was turning out to be very profitable. And what we decided to do was take a little bit of the profit off every TV commercial we made, and we put it to one side. And then when we got enough money together, we made a short film, which means that my output isn't huge, but it does mean that every single frame that you see is the frame that I wanted to be there. And as creatives go, that's gold. So, and the other thing was because we were working with professionals in regards to making the TV commercials, and they were getting a lot of money out of us from that point of view, it got to the point where a few of them just said, hey, I'll do the music for you for free. You've given me so much work, let me do that. And the sound guys did the same, and the VFX company did the same. So basically there's four of us who collaborate pretty much all the time on these films, and I don't pay for them. So I've been able to rapidly increase the number of films I can get out over the last few years because I don't have to save up as much to pay for them. And they just see it as a fantastic creative release. So they're very, very happy to do it. And they all freely admit that a couple of them have said, if it hadn't been for the work we were providing for them with our TV commercials, they probably would have gone under as a company. And so this is payback. So it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship that we've established. But I've sort of, I now no longer apply for any government grants because Richard and I both decided that that is the money that should go to young filmmakers, not old crusty people like us. So we let the youngsters who are starting out get that money, and we pay for this stuff ourselves.
Well, we're so happy to have you back for a third film, and so proud that this film was conceived at the festival years ago. I think Miles wanted a quick show and tell comment, Miles, before I move on to Chris.
Yeah, just real quick. When Michael finished the film, he sent me this lookbook as a gift, and there's if anyone wants, if you could, I know it's Zoom and it's awful, but there's images of Michael working on the film here with the models, and I just think it's so cool to see him at work. So I just wanted to show that.
We're gonna move forward to AIDA, though of course we invite anybody watching, you can put your questions in the chat, please, for our filmmakers. Chris, I have to say, when I saw your film in our screening pool, I was really taken by how it struck me like a very understated poem. And a lot of the short films are kind of the opposite of being understated, but it works in such a clever and simple way. I guess my first question would be just your approach about the design and inspiration of the film. It's a film that feels like almost a mirror image in some ways of the first half and the second half, and then we can move on a little bit to casting and production. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, first of all. I actually kind of struggled with how I've never made a short film before. I had made 2 features prior to this, and I make a lot of commercials and stuff, but like I was kind of curious about what it'd be like to make a short film and see if I could do it. And so kind of to your observation, I felt that it sort of needed, what I love in short films is when it kind of comes full circle, and I don't feel like the story is trying to do too much in a short amount of time. So I wanted a story that would be can be contained within 10 minutes and feel fulfilling and reach its objective within that time. So that was part of it. And then I sort of like just the balance, like you mentioned poem. That's kind of how I felt about it. It kind of has this, it kind of synchronizes by the end and balances out. And so that was definitely on my mind when I was doing that. And it kind of felt like a poem or a song. And then in terms of the inspiration of the story, my film is a little bit about memory and sort of its our association to certain things such as music and how that can spark our memory. So I knew I wanted to tell a story about music. Specifically, it kind of started that way. And then it started getting a little bit more personal, my own personal experience with family members and whatnot, without giving too much away. And so that sort of, one thing led to the next. And I think I was in a jog somewhere in Tokyo when this sort of, the story idea finally came to me. I just kind of clicked, and then I just started committing it to paper.
My next question was going to be about the international nature of your shoot. So you said you were at a jog in Tokyo. Why were you there? And how did a filmmaker in Sacramento end up shooting a film in Japan?
So I moved to Japan in 2017 because my wife, she's a meteorologist, and she got a job working for NHK there. And so it was sort of an exciting adventure. And I actually knew a couple people over there because one of my feature films, we had an actor in that. His name is Richard. He's actually Kiko's dad. So I was sort of excited to move somewhere that I knew somebody. And so, that's why I was living in Japan at the time. And while I was there, I was like, well, this is an amazing backdrop, and I have to tell a story before we end up moving. Now my wife got a job in Sacramento, so we moved it back to the States. But yeah, so while I was there, I was like, Tokyo's amazing. I would love to leave this place with a story, hopefully. And so that's why it was set in Tokyo, and how I met Kiko is through earlier film project.
There's a Kiko, I wonder, this seems like the perfect time for you to maybe say, when you were approached with the script or the idea, what were your thoughts about the character, your interest in working on short films, and this one in particular? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about Chris's pitch for you to get involved with the film.
Yeah, so it's great to be here with you all. Hope you're having a great Wednesday over there. I think it's Thursday over here. I'm in Tokyo right now, but so I was actually able to visit Chris and his team when they were shooting a film with my father. They were shooting it in Oregon, and I was able to be with them for a couple of days when they were in production for that. And so I had kind of seen how Chris works and his team works, and I kind of knew the types of stories he wanted to make beforehand. So when he and his wife moved here and he came up with the idea for shooting something together, it was kind of an immediate yes for me. I already knew that he wanted to really have a story that would be truthful to the community here. And so, he brought up the story idea, and I was just excited about it from the get-go, really.
Were there any particular challenges on the shoot? And I can kind of ask this to either of you, like permitting in Japan, you have some shots on a subway station and some other things in public places. What was involved in using different public locations there? And
creativity and thinking on your feet, basically. But it's actually a little bit hard to get permits in certain areas in Japan. They're a bit strict on some ends, but we kind of shot a lot of the shots kind of not secretly, but like
run and gun stuff.
Basically, and it kind of worked out. So,
one of the big challenges is I actually don't speak Japanese, and I was very conscious of wanting to not overly assert my voice on this project, even though it was my idea and my story. But I really wanted to hear from Kiko and hear her interpretation of kind of the story I had and the script I had. So I leaned on her and the other cast members to sort of reinterpret my story in a way. And I know Kiko, her work very well. So I knew that she was more than capable of not just interpreting what I made, but actually enhancing it and lifting it up. So that was a bit of a small challenge, but it was actually kind of what excited me about it, was directing in a different language. I was always curious about, I don't know if this is the case for other filmmakers, but sometimes occasionally I watch a lot of foreign films, and occasionally if it's in a different language, I'm thinking, am I really connecting with this performance because it's so great, or is it because am I missing something because I'm not picking up on all the nuance because I don't speak the language? And So I was just curious at how that would affect my directorial sort of approach, and if I would be able to pinpoint a good performance or a good delivery. And so that was definitely part of the challenge, and I actually relished it, really enjoyed it. And then I leaned again heavily on Kiko in terms of locations and getting around and finding good like train stations to film at and whatnot.
How about the lullaby that's a sort of a refrain in it? Was that part of the original concept, or is that something that Kiko was familiar with in Japan? Obviously, it's in English.
Yeah, so that was actually when I wrote the script. The lullaby didn't have I didn't know which lullaby was going to be there, but there was a lullaby in place there, and I knew it had to be. That was one of the most important elements. So I actually finished the script months before we even started because I didn't find the right song. And so I was actually asking Kiko if she was familiar with any sort of lesser known lullabies or lullabies that are popular and sort of open source, license wise in Japan that we could use. And a lot of them just weren't connecting, and I knew that the song had to be something that when you hear it, you felt like you've heard it before, no matter where you're from in the world, but also something that hopefully, yeah, you want to hear again. And so the song was so important, and I actually almost gave up on the project because I couldn't find the right lullaby. And then I think one night, probably on the 40th page of YouTube searching Japanese lullabies, I finally found this one song, and it was really a kind of a cheesy rendition of it, but I could hear the melody in it, and I thought, oh my goodness, Kiko, if Kiko were singing this a cappella, it would be amazing. So I sent it her way, and she sent me a rough track from her phone, and I got goosebumps, so I knew that we were in business.
The last question I'll ask you both is, what are you working on now, or what's next for you?
You guys.
For myself, I'm still here in Tokyo. I was hoping to be kind of traveling a little bit more, but things have kind of transpired that makes that a little bit difficult right now. But it's actually kind of given me an opportunity to be really finishing and working on an EP that I'm working on. So I usually perform more in the music realm. I'm a singer, and so I'm working on an EP that I'll be hopefully releasing later this year. So yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a full-fledged production company, so I do a lot of commercials and social media ads and whatnot. And I'm actually working on my third feature script right now, so getting close to finishing that. So yeah.
Congratulations to both of you. Thank you for
so much.
being here today. And yeah, stick around. Hopefully watch the chat. I see lots of questions in the scroll. I think Peter's having a few technical difficulties, so we are going to head to Russell's film, Animal. I guess the first question I'll ask you is, you begin with a Kafka quote. What inspired you to set the tone with that?
Oh, there's lots of ways I could answer that question. So the film itself is intentionally a bit impressionistic and elliptical, and it comes from sort of thinking through this whole idea of, well, first of all, how we think about coming of age films and coming of age stories. And I was thinking when I was a tween and experiencing these feelings and this sense of like, I don't know what is going on with my body, and these like weird emotions and aggression. And I sort of wanted to translate that in some way, both literally and metaphorically, as a kind of metamorphosis and this idea of being afraid of what you might become. And so thematically, that's sort of all through the film in terms of the way the kids see the adults. And it was actually, my producers were like, we might need a quote in the beginning. So that was sort of a collaborative response to the film to sort of set the tone of thematically sort of what we're working with.
So that was that was a late ad after the production?
Absolutely. Yeah, there was some talk of like, maybe we need something to sort of set the tone. And I thought of a couple of some Morris Sendak quotes. And but then I just thought, what am I doing? It's the Metamorphosis. It's Kafka. So you know, I'm not one to necessarily always want to sort of describe what I'm doing in film, and just sort of let folks respond how they're going to respond. So I think the film works with or without it, but I also think it nicely frames some of the themes I'm working on.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, when we're laying out the shorts collections this year for the festival, you know, we have a horror delights program, and your film could have easily slid in that direction. But in a way, I felt that it was kind of more counterintuitive, the coming of age aspect of the film, to sort of place it in this framework than as a straight up horror film, because it really communicates on both levels, I think, in very clear terms. I'm curious about your casting of Will and Maggie. Child actors, always hard to find someone with sort of screen presence, and your lead actor has an enigma, sort of enigmatic sort of quality that really translates in your story. So could you talk a little bit about how you found them?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has worked with children, you know, it's sort of a gamble how that's going to play out. And I just got super lucky. I should have played the lottery when I cast them. Maybe it would have worked out for me. But the boy, Will, he's had some theater training. So he kind of came into it. If anything, I had to sort of pull him back a little bit because of that theater training. But Maggie, the cat who plays Maggie, had never done any acting. That's her. Like, she rides like mountain bikes in competition. She's like 12 years old, and she's like doing stuff on a bike that, you know, I wouldn't have done when I was 20 years old. And I'm far from that now. So she was just this tough kid, and had this real presence. There was no awareness of the camera, and that was not really much that I did about that. That was just, you know, as soon as I said action, she just settled into her skin. So I got super lucky. I wish I could take credit for, I molded these young actors into this incredible performance, but I sort of stood back in awe after every take at what they were doing. Again, particularly Kat, because of her lack of experience. And now she, you know, she wants to do more. She wants to do more acting, which is super fun. And it's funny, you know, you mentioned the horror element. I had this sort of running argument with an old writing partner of mine, because I don't really care for horror as a genre, which I know is an unpopular opinion. We actually have a whole podcast where he makes me watch horror movies, and I explain why they're terrible. And so he's always mocked me that I basically made a horror movie, and I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to make a horror movie, but you know, sometimes the story takes you down a path that you don't expect.
In your credits, you have some acknowledgments to the University of Arkansas that I know where you've worked. I wonder if you could speak to the role of students in crewing your film, or leveraging those things, and kind of how those connections, you know, came to be and worked out. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So for the last 6 years, I've been teaching at the University of Arkansas, which does not traditionally have a film program. They have film studies, but not film production. So I've been trying to sort of get something going at the university. And it occurred to me, you know, one of the best ways to do that is to give them like real on-set experience. So this is the biggest budget I've ever worked with on a short. And I raised some money on you know, crowdsourcing, and then a local production company matched what I had raised. So I was able to hire professional heads of department, a cinematographer, and some sound folks, and then bring students on underneath them, sort of to apprentice. So we had students, second ACs and grips and gaffers and sound crew. So it was a 4-day shoot, partly because we were working with kids, so we couldn't work that long, but it also meant that the students, you know, on day 2, you know, picked up the lingo and were setting up C-stands, and because they were working with professionals, you know, they had to get with it, right? This wasn't a class where you could sort of not show up or sort of blow it off. This was a professional, I paid them. That was also important, to professionalize the process. So this is all outside of the purview of the university. but it was, to me, by the time the production was done, I sort of felt like I knew I had something pretty good to put together as a film, but I was so proud of like what we had done together as a crew, and seeing what it inspired in the students. One student went off and formed the first film production club on campus. And then the university fortunately recognized that, and the University of Arkansas actually funded me for 3 more films with a grant at 2.5 times my budget for each film. So that's super exciting.
Yeah.
And,
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I mentioned before we got online, I'm not necessarily going to be with the university after this year, but I'm still going to make the films. It was a joint grant with someone in theater department to write the script. So we'll still do that, and we'll still provide that for the students at the University of Arkansas. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Did the Ozarks play a role in your inspiration for the visual design of the film?
Oh, for sure. Originally, this was a feature idea in Northern California. I lived for a hot minute in Ventura, California. And while I was there, the first wolf in 100 years had crossed the border from Oregon into Northern California. So, apparently wolves were all over Northern California, but they had gone extinct. And one with a radio collar had crossed the border. And this was sort of the inspiration, was this thinking about this idea of a wolf sort of showing up in that part of the country, which had not been there, and sort of this fear associated with that. And then when I moved to Arkansas, there was a lot of overlap in terms of the sort of natural beauty of the region, but also a very different kind of culture in terms of the Ozark Mountains. Certainly the older male character as a kind of stand-in for toxic masculinity and a certain kind of man in that part of the country. So I was leaning into both sort of stereotypical ideas perhaps we have of that part of the country, but also this notion of the connection to nature. And that's really what the kids are struggling with, is this pull toward nature, and what does it mean to sort of stay wild in a sense. So that was huge for me, and a lot of conversations with the cinematographer about pushing certain colors to match that aesthetic.
The last question I'll ask you in my portion is about specifically the score and the sound design, which I think is incredible in the film, particularly when Will is in the house alone, kind of feeling his untamed side coming out. So could you talk just a little bit about crafting the score or the mix?
For sure, yeah. So the sound design, I did most of the sound design myself, which is why it took so long. But it was really fun. That was a skill set that I had used before on other films that I had no money and had to do everything. And this time, the sound design was really important to me in terms of layering sound and bringing nature indoors in a lot of those sequences. So I just spent months gathering sound in the Ozarks, and the tracks on Premiere go way deep in constructing those. So that was a lot of fun. I did eventually have a local sound designer sort of come on and help with a 5.1 mix and sort of sweeten some of the sounds. And he was quite complimentary on my work, which I felt pretty good about, because I'm not a sound designer. But the score, I can brag all day because I had nothing to do with. It's an amazing Arkansan composer named Amos Cochran, who's put out a lot of EPs and albums and has also scored a lot of films. Anyone interested, he's phenomenal, and way out of my price range, like could not afford him. But he saw a cut of the film and thought, oh goodness, another Arkansas short. Let's see what this is. And he really connected with it. He really loved it. So he agreed to do the music for way less than he normally would charge, and sort of lost himself in it, and ended up hiring like a violinist. And so we got a really rich score that he then turned into an EP and released as a separate album, which is pretty cool. And there's a lot of like deep cuts, like tracks we didn't use that he was just experimenting. So I felt like I got to play in this world of composition that is completely out of my wheelhouse. That is not something I could ever do. And just so fun to watch someone who's really skilled be inspired by the visuals I was giving him to produce something like that. So.
Well, thank you for your film. Thank you for being here. And I hope you send us your next 3 projects that are in development that were funded on this. It's such
Well,
an
absolutely.
story. We're going to move to FLORA, my dear, Dan Janos. You're, as someone who teaches film history, of course, I immediately was drawn to your story and subject, and that we may have some viewers out there that weren't maybe familiar with why Edward Muybridge is famous. Of course, they know the story you're telling now, but my first question is going to be, why Muybridge to you? Why did he become the subject of this animated work?
Yeah, well, Michael, thanks for having the film in the festival, and it's great to hear from all the other filmmakers. So I'm really having a good time hearing and listening. So why Muybridge? I think because the idea for the film actually came from making pancakes. I was making pancakes with my kids, and I heard the sound with the batter and the whisk, and it sounded like horse hooves to me. And I thought, oh, that'd be interesting. What if I took Muybridge's horse pictures and animated them to this sound? And it was really just an idea, right? Just like pop an idea. And I put the 2 things together and thought, okay, that's interesting. What if we created other sounds that you could get out of the kitchen, right? And grab some of his other images and some of his other motion studies, and just was sort of picking away at it, right? Like it didn't really have a filmic direction as much as just sort of studies, my own studies of his motion studies with these domestic normal sounds, I suppose. And that sort of pushed me into reading more about Muybridge beyond my understanding of who he was. And I read.
Dan, do you want to just say a real quick summary? I'm happy to do it myself, but I prefer you do it. Of why is Muybridge so famous? Maybe some people in Northern California around us have seen his statue and the Presidio or heard illusions, but of course the famous Stanford experiments with the horses. But just for our audience who might not know, because your film doesn't necessarily tell his claim to fame.
Yeah, so if you take film history, or you're interested in film history, at some point you're going to come across him, because prior to motion picture, he was someone who was an inventor, a photographer, a very rich life, but specifically he was interested in trying to capture motion. So with photography, he found a way to freeze time, right? And not having people sit still for 15 seconds like the old Civil War photographs, but he invented a way to actually freeze a split second of time. And that turned into, well, what if we captured a series of instances and froze those instances in time, and we could study motion that way, because things are happening faster than the eye can see them. And so his whole thing was, how can we do that? And he found a way to do it, taking a bunch of cameras that were triggered as something passed through, the field of view of these cameras. And then he would put these images together. And to us now, they look like stills from an animation, right? They are like, or they look like individual frames from a strip of motion picture film. So it was a precursor to the moving image. And, without his work, motion pictures may have come along at a different time in a different way, but he's integral, right? He's key to the medium that we're all digging, right? The thing that we're doing. So he's pretty monumental in that world. Is that a pretty good summation? Does that get it, you think?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good. I mean, some people might call him the father of motion pictures. And even though his early movies were really, as you said, just studies in motion, still photographs, he built this thing called the Zoopraxiscope that could hold all his still images, and he'd spin it in front of a lens and a projector. And it was some of the first animations that were projected that people had ever seen in the world. So yes.
Yeah. So he's big. His contribution is huge. And so in my little studies, I thought, well, I should probably find out more about him beyond just my basic knowledge. And it led me to Rebecca Solnit's book about the West. and I'll grab it off the shelf. The name is long and I forget it, but I came across the story, and maybe it was in Wikipedia, I'm not sure, but it came across the story that I'm following in my film of him murdering his wife's lover. And I guess what blew me away about this is just, you have this heroic figure or this monumental figure, and there's this really sordid story from his life that you might not know. And not wanting to be like, oh, this is something to like reveal this dark past, but just what do you do whenever someone that you look up to or you think is amazing has this very human ripple, almost, wait, he killed somebody and then he got away with it because he had a bunch of buddies on the jury, and really, wow, I didn't know that. So that story inspired me, and it's her writing. I mean, the way she wrote it and researched that story was amazing. And so that just helped me create some shape around these disconnected studies that I was doing. And then all of a sudden it all sort of came together. Well, not all of a sudden, because it's animation, right? So over time, it sort of came together one shot at a time. And it was moving back and forth between using text to tell a story, using his images to illustrate a story. And I thought that was a little bit ironic and maybe clever. Like, here is his work to tell the story of a not such a great story in his life, and throwing it all into the soup and seeing how it came out.
How did you get these scans of his work, like the source material for the animation that you worked with? And then what was the animation process, or if you could just talk a little bit about how you manipulated them technologically speaking?
Yeah, I basically took a DSLR camera and created a sort of a pseudo copy stand, right? And so I just had even light shining on the image, looking for the larger images that I could out of print, and taking the image and then, you know, bringing that in at a high resolution, and then turning those into individual frames for my animation. And, you know, it's like anything. At first, it was the not smart way to do it. And the second time, it was like a little bit of a better way. And, you know, there's, I don't know, 30 or 40 shots in the film. By 10 or 15, I kind of had a rhythm and a flow to it. So it was pretty straightforward, you know. Michael was talking about his animation earlier, and I really appreciated him talking about having to go back to old school approaches. And what I liked about this project that I was involved that I made is it's pretty immediate, right? So here's a still image. I've got a camera. I can shoot high resolution. I can set this up in my little studio, and pretty quickly create something without relying on labs and all this other stuff that we would normally have to a long time, 20 years ago or whatever. So
how about the sound design side of your film? I know you're a musician and you have a very interesting score for your project. Could you just talk a little bit about the accompanying sound work?
Yeah, it was important to me to get out of the historical record through the sound. And I guess what I'm saying is, it's not an homage to motion studies. It's a document of this guy's murder, right? And how do you tell an interesting story through text and through his motion studies and sound? And so I sort of gave myself the parameters of the sounds have to come out of my kitchen. And I started opening up drawers, and I started running water and grabbing utensils and creating sounds with my toaster. And for some reason, that domestic sonic landscape tied back to FLORA, right? So while Ed Weird is out there traveling the world and doing all these crazy projects, his wife is back home in San Francisco hanging out and doing the nightlife and having an affair, and she's a young woman. And I just thought there was something about this domestic world through the sound that I was creating, while meanwhile he was off running around. And there you go, pal. You take off, and she went and had an affair. So this was it. And then finding Dvorak's piece of music was just the thing that tied it all together in this epic, sonic landscape. So it was kind of like the way the shots came together, very piecemeal, a lot of just trial and error and experimenting, and a very kind of odd way to make a film of, you know, the text became a script, but the shots themselves became sort of these sliding images that moved all around, and the sounds moved all around as well. And it took a while to get to the sequence of events that we see now. But, you know, I had this shell of a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. But what motion study works best for, you know, he rode a carriage to the house and knocked on the door. You know, what images do I use and what sounds do I use? So there was a lot of freedom and experimentation in that. I'm kind of getting off from the sound thing, but I guess they were all bubbling together at the same time. You know, it wasn't picture lock sound design. It was very much like, oh, let's try this sound with this shot. Build it that way.
I could keep asking all of you questions, but I want to allow at least a few minutes as we approach an hour mark for any of the attendees that are watching live to ask a question. So if somebody would like to ask a question that is watching the panel, you can raise your hand and we can welcome you in to ask a question. And I have a kind of broad question that I'd like, maybe we could do a little speed round while people think about a question. It's something I haven't asked any of the panels, short film panels yet, but I wonder if everybody could just share a filmmaker or a film that you find as a big inspiration for your work. And we could just kind of quickly go around, and then I do see that we'll have a question right after this. So Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. So a filmmaker that sort of informs my work or inspires me.
Sure.
That's tough. There's so many, but I would say like Terrence Malick is definitely one of them. Even I would say Chloe, who just won Best Director at the Oscars last year. She Nomadland was awesome, but I really love her first film, The Writer. I guess that's actually her second film, but yeah, I was a big fan of that. And so those are two current.
Awesome. Kiko, do you want to participate in this?
Sure. I've really been, I feel like Audrey Hepburn's work, as well as the film Amélie, has been really inspiring to me throughout the years.
Fantastic. Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, so for me, it's old school. It's Ray Harryhausen and Will Vinton. I mean, as
one might expect. What a great reference.
Well, they're working, that was it.
Was that me? I'm next?
Yes.
The filmmakers at Vanishing Angle for the way that they run their sets.
Excellent. Russell? You're muted.
It's always one of us. I actually do love Jim Cummings' work. But Terrence Malick was the name I was going to throw out there, especially for Animal. But heroes are like Soderbergh. He seems to be different with every film. And Michael Haneke, who is always the same, but always genius. So.
And Dan, and then I think we had a couple of students that are ready to come on.
Yeah, Frederick Weissman, you know, different than the film I made, but just his work blows me away because of how immediate it is. And it's very experimental and yet so revealing. So Frederick Weissman.
Hey, Nick, good to see you. Let's hear your question.
My question was to everyone. And what was the toughest part of each of you guys' filming? Like, what was the toughest part during production, pre-production, even post-production for each of you guys' shorts?
I'll go first. Weather. It rained when it wasn't supposed to, so we had to rearrange our whole shooting schedule, and then I had to digitally make it look like it was raining when it wasn't in certain shots that we had already shot. So that was a pain.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. For me, it was a challenge that I imposed on myself. And that was to do an animation film, which implies movement, and have a main character that couldn't move. But that was self-inflicted.
I was gonna say that we had a cricket problem halfway through our set, where a certain time of the night would hit and the crickets would start up, which we didn't anticipate because we did all of our prep work during the day, and it almost ruined the movie because we had to. Luckily, there was only one, but we had to find a way to find it and kill it, and it took a while.
I would say for AIDA, we had a rather large portion of the film has a fussy child in the movie, like an infant, and there was like a weird balance there of how much crying should be going on, and then also we wanted to Kiko is supposed to calm the child down by singing, and every time the infant saw Kiko, he would stop crying anyway. So it was kind of a weird balance. We were trying to keep him fussy, but at the same time not distressed. And yeah, I remember that being quite a bit challenging, but we got through it.
I guess I'll throw in for an animation, I had weather doesn't matter, temperature doesn't matter, right? It's just sitting here at the desk doing things. So it's more about the content of trying to decide how important is it that the audience understands who this protagonist is in the history of cinema? Is it important that you understand who this Edward Muybridge guy is? Because if you don't know who he is, can you still enjoy the story as this melodramatic murder? And so trying to find the sweet spot between exposition of explaining history and just making a good murder story, you know? So I try to lean towards the excitement of the murder and all that. And if you know who the guy is, hey, wow, I didn't know that. So that was the challenge.
Kiko, do you have an acting anecdote you want to share?
Let's see. Well, I didn't really find I felt like the whole process was very smooth. There wasn't anything like too difficult that we encountered, but our original actress for the role of my mother, I don't want to give too much away, so I'm like kind of thinking about what to say, but the lady that was supposed to play my mother, there was a different lady originally that we were hoping to play that part, but she wasn't able to play it like all of a sudden, but we ended up being able to find someone else, and it ended up being really, really beautiful being able to work with her. So I guess difficulties like may come up, but they always kind of end up being almost for the better. Obviously it was like too bad we couldn't work with the original lady, but it ended up working out. So
that's such an important beat in your movie, that moment of recognition between you and the mother character, that it definitely worked out well at the end. Next question, Clayton, looks like you have a question for the.
So what my question was for you, Miles, about it not being a typical upbringing where you had a lot of support, but that character in the film didn't seem like he had a lot of support, and it sounded like what you were saying was the through line for the students that were coming through your camp. Where did you like draw experiences from? Did you have a couple students you really connected with, or did you like, how did you get those stories into the film?
So like you're saying, there's like the emotional and then the plot through line. So the emotional through line is very much mine. But as far as plot goes, I did go to prom. I'm not photosensitive. They tried to make me have seizures with strobe light testing and stuff like that. And I would tell them, don't bother, it just hurts. That's all. And so, you know, I needed to center the movie somewhere that had to do with not feeling left behind. Like what is a sort of ritual coming of age moment that's seminal to teens that people will relate to whether they have epilepsy or not. And so that's why I chose prom. But what's remarkable, the helmet, the image of the helmet comes from someone I know. The kinds of conversations are conversations I have had in real life. But what's remarkable about epilepsy is that it's so diverse. Chris mentioned Chloe Zhao's The Rider. That's an epilepsy story. They didn't brand it that way, but it is. You cannot write fiction about epilepsy. It cannot be done. You hear the craziest, wildest things when you talk to this community. And sure enough, when I've shown this film, I had someone come to my premiere and stand up and say, I went to prom knowing the lights would make me have a seizure, and this is like a surreal moment. Like, this is my story. So it's sort of after the fact, you sort of start to realize that it's not as fictitious as you tried, you know.
Well, I would love to go on, but we are trying to hold around an hour, which I think we have just passed a little bit over, but we are so grateful for all of you sharing your stories with us. It's been real honor to have you here and a pleasure to chat with you. So we wish you the best of luck. We love to nurture relationships with filmmakers. I hear so many of you working on other projects that I hope you'll send them to us and that we can actually host you out in California sometime. We love to have filmmakers on the ground. So enjoy the festival, everyone. If you're out there, we have one more live shorts discussion coming up tomorrow at 12 o'clock, the Horror Delights. And then we're also running a Horror Delights trivia night, pub style trivia Friday night, a sort of social event at 9 p.m. You can find all that information at the Alexander Valley Film Festival website. Big thanks again to our panelists and to our audience, and enjoy the festival, everybody. Take care.
Hey guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.